Can everybody hear me? Can I see a thumbs up in the chat box? Okay. Welcome, everybody. We're so happy to have everybody here. Thank you so much for the thumbs up. As time goes, we will have more people come through, but I think just for time's sake, let's get started. If you are new here, welcome. We are so excited to have you here at GDG Soweto. Um, However, you may have joined, whether it is through WhatsApp, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, what other social media platform? I think we do need to get TikTok there to start doing some moves. Thank you so much for joining in. Also, again, to give you a background of the boot camp that we're doing, it is over a course of 8 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, twice every week, Tuesday and Thursday. So please do note that try your best to come in through Tuesdays and Thursdays. We will be having different speakers. This week we are having the speaker that we're having today for Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, which we'll get into that. We do have activities that we're doing. It's a very technical talk, so I hope everybody has their laptops with them, pen, paper, and after the technical talk, there is sort of a requirement of something that you must submit during a certain date or, before a certain date. So please do make sure that you submit that. What else do I have to say? Yes, we're very excited to have you here. It's a boot camp. We really wanted to do a boot camp like this to just sort of equip people with an understanding of different things that you can do in the tech environment. And maybe while listening to some of this talks throughout the weeks, you'll get, interested to build something of your own, and which we're really excited to see. If you have something on your own that you'd like to share, please on WhatsApp, share with us so we can put it on our social media platforms. We're really excited to connect with the community, to connect with yourselves, see what we can build as a team. Because at the end of the day, we're doing this for you, and we're excited to do this for you. So also, if you do miss any of our technical talks, you will see this on YouTube. Again, very excited to have it on YouTube. Throughout YouTube, make sure that you watch the videos when it comes to creating or submitting any of the work that is due. Watch the videos, it's going to be so good. It allows you to walk through the steps. If you were not here last week, we had our first talks, it was the week before, and it was very nice. It was a walkthrough, step-by-step thing, and the YouTube really does help. It was 2 weeks back. So let's just get into today's talk. Let me not bore you guys to death talking about everything GDG Soweto. Today's talk is by our very own Lesego. I hope everybody's giving giving a round of applause on their side because we're very excited for this one. It's an introduction to serverless computing with cloud function and app engine. This is very exciting. I know that everybody that has joined here must be looking forward to going forth with this talk. I know I am. So without further ado, welcome Lesego. Thank you so much for gracing us with the talk and walking us through how do we do this? Because I'm interested too. And then the YouTube link will also be sent to the group. Please make sure that you are on our WhatsApp group. We have so much information. I think Lesego is still coming through. When he gets through, let me just talk about this meanwhile. We have a WhatsApp group where we share a lot of information, and we try our best to share different opportunities, whether it comes to hackathons that we have encountered ourselves, or it comes to opportunities for you to better your skills or whatnot. We try to share it in the group as much as possible. I will put the WhatsApp link on the chats here, but that's where you would get the YouTube link. And please join through our WhatsApp link. If you have any questions before Lesego joins, just let us know. Lesego, are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready. I hope you guys are well. Can
Yay.
you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, let me firstly send a link to the lab as well in the chat, and then we'll start. Okay, I've sent the link to the lab in the chat. I think let me just give everyone 2 minutes to open it, and then we can start from there. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining. Okay, so before starting today's topic, I'll just do a light intro because I think that we need to just bring everyone up to speed in terms of what exactly we're going to be discussing. And then also just get a bit familiar with some terminology as well so that we're on the same page going forward. And then from there, we'll get into the lab, which is fairly quick. It's about 30 minutes. I'm sure we can do it in about 20. And then from there, we'll have done a good start for the week. And then on Thursday, we're going to dive a lot deeper into it. And essentially, the lab on Thursday will be about an hour long, and it'll be building on today's lab. So today's lab is essentially going to be us using Google Cloud App Engine. And for those who don't know, App Engine is basically a serverless service that Google provides that allows people to essentially launch web applications as well as microservices. And you can host it on the platform and essentially for REST APIs, web applications, and any IoT, as well as logging apps as well. So let me quickly share my screen and then we can get started from there. Okay, if you can see my screen, please just agree there in the chat and then I'll get started. Okay, thank you. So before I begin, I'm just gonna ask a few questions, and I think we can respond in the chat just to make it a little bit interactive, but also mostly just to make sure that we are on the same page, so that when I explain, we don't leave everyone behind or anyone behind, rather. So the first thing I'm gonna ask in the chat is, could you guys please explain what your understanding is of the word serverless? Okay, I see Sabella says without dedicated API backend. Okay, it's a good first answer. Are there any others? Okay, good answer from Mateo. I think I hope I got your name right. It says, "With the cloud manager maintains everything and the developers can just focus on writing code." Okay, I think that's very good. Are there any more takers last minute? Okay, Tommy says it's a cloud native development model that allows developers to build and run apps. Okay, I think that's good. I think a combination of the answers is pretty much was correct. So pretty much a serverless system is basically a cloud service that allows customers to use cloud capability without having to use any hardware in person. That's basically the main definition of a serverless function or serverless service. So what that essentially means is typically back in the day, before the recent cloud age, what used to happen was people would develop applications, write the code, and then even host it on premises, meaning within the offices that they were based in. And they would essentially have mini computers running the code to be able to serve the application to people. So obviously, with the growth of cloud, meaning Google Cloud Platform and AWS and other competitors as well, what that allowed for is essentially to allow developers and companies to not have to own their own hardware in order to be able to run software. And the main reason for that, why it's important, is essentially it allows for reduced costs. And what serverless means is that essentially the server for your service only spins up and runs the moment when your service is actually needed or actually requested, right? So typically, serverless functions are those that, for example, like a web application, if you host a web app, for example, let's say YouTube, when people are using the app, then it's going to spin up a server for you and answer to people's requests and send a response. And then when, for example, let's say that no one was using YouTube, which we know, of course, in this day and age is highly unlikely that someone using YouTube at every single minute. But in the advent of, let's say, no one was using it, maybe in the early days, then at that point in time, what would happen is your cloud service provider, Google Cloud in this instance, would then scale all the servers back to zero, meaning that there wouldn't be any server running so that you aren't incurring any costs. And that's basically the main purpose about serverless is to reduce costs for businesses, shift the costs to the cloud, and essentially only pay for as you use the service. So that's the main reason why serverless came about. And the reason why I wanted us just to have a clear definition of that is because App Engine is a serverless service, all right? So my last question before beginning is, do people know what a microservice is? Okay, I see Sabelo again gave a good attempt. He says small compute server. Mateo says a small component of an application that is independent of a larger app in its architecture. That's a very great answer. That's a very great answer. Are there any other takers just to give it a shot? Okay, so pretty much Mateo got it right. It's a small component of an application that is independent of a larger app. That's what a microservice is. So typically, what would happen is that because a lot of applications, especially enterprise applications, they tend to be made up of a lot of smaller pieces, right? And again, for example, just to make it more realistic and so people can relate, YouTube is what I'll use. So you could have a front end service, which typically, let's say, is what serves the front end of the application. So in this scenario, if we look at YouTube, you could say you use a framework like React or Angular to basically be one of the services, and that would basically serve the front end. And then you could have another part or another service, which would basically be the back end. And then you could have, let's say, another service, which basically is just for running notifications for, let's say, your users to notify them of new videos and when new content drops or of comments or when those with channels reach a certain number of subscribers. So you can basically split up applications into different services, right? And that's why the term microservice became a very huge trend after the cloud, because what that meant was essentially, again, going back to the act of reducing costs for businesses and shifting everything to the cloud. If you have multiple microservices, then essentially everything only gets billed and charged as you use it, right? And most importantly, as your demand for your application scales. So, for example, if you have, let's say, 100 people trying to access YouTube, you might obviously find that your front end is going to be working a lot, right? And maybe not your notification system. But the minute you have like a million users, of course, your notification system is going to be working overtime because you have to send out notifications to so many different users, right? So that was one of the reasons why microservice became a very great way in terms of designing applications, and also to make sure that in terms of your business, you're running a lean model, which essentially just means that you're not having a huge overhead of costs and you're ensuring that every cost that you incur is going to be one for actually being used in the business, not stuff that's going to run and then not actually be useful. All right. So again, microservices are very important in the complete architecture of a system. So in terms of App Engine is one of the original services that Google Cloud launched. This is around 2010 to 2012. And App Engine has become very popular for web applications mostly, as well as for JSON APIs, so APIs for backend, right? And if I just scroll down a bit, you'll see how they've broken it down, right? So typically what happens is, as we discussed, application, and then you break down your application into different services, which are essentially called microservices, right? And now, for example, if we go back to our YouTube one, if you have your front end, which is developed in, I'll just stick with Angular for now. If you have your front end, which is developed in Angular, you would then deploy that service, right? Through App Engine. And then what happens is that if, for example, 2025, you launch version 1 of YouTube, right? You would then have that as a version on Google Cloud. And then any other time when you want to deploy a new application, it will create a new version, right? And as that occurs, you can just direct traffic to your new versions as you see fit. Or you could split traffic between your versions if you're looking to do different amounts of product testing, right? And each time that a version runs, it essentially calls up an instance. And now this is when you start to get build, and this is when the power of the cloud starts to come in, right? So an instance is basically a server that's running. And this only occurs, as I mentioned earlier, when it's needed. So if you go to youtube.com and then you press enter, that's when basically your servers would then spin up and you would then have an instance. Because in that moment in time, someone is requesting your services, right? And that's why you would have a new instance spun up. So that's how they show you essentially how you have an application, which is a complete app that you've built. And then you have your microservices, which serve different functions for your application. And then as you deploy your app, you have different versions for it. And when it's then used by your consumers or your customers, that's when the actual instance for it is then spun up, right? So in today's scenario, we're just going to be deploying a mini application. We'll be using Python. The lab gives you three options. You can choose any of the ones that you're familiar with. And essentially, when you're done with it, is what you will take a screenshot of and then submit for this week's work before diving into the longer lab on Thursday. So for now, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, and then I'm going to start sharing the screen for the lab. In the meantime, if there's any questions, you can just drop them in the chat. Okay, so let me know once you can see the lab on screen. And as I mentioned again, if you look on the left, you'll see that there's three options for you to choose when beginning the lab. You can either do the lab in Python, which is what we'll do, and then you can do the lab in Go as well, and also in PHP, right? So those are your three options for doing the lab. You can choose a language which you're familiar with. If you don't know any, it's all right. You can just use Python. It's pretty much easy as it's in written language. In English, it's very easy to understand. It's not like the other ones. If you're a beginner, you can do that as well. So I'll just give everyone about 1 minute, 2 minutes just to join the lab and sign in as well on your end, and then we'll begin from there. Okay, I hope everyone has been able to open the lab on your side. If you have any challenges, please do just mention them in the chat and then we'll assist you with that. So basically, as I mentioned, today's lab is a very quick one. How it's going to go is we're going to first download a repo that Google has provided us. And essentially, it's just sort of a basic Hello World project that you can download locally onto your machine through GitHub. And then what's going to happen from there is we're going to use that very same application to then deploy it to App Engine and show you firstly how easy it is to deploy applications using Google Cloud's CLI, which is the command line interface, which basically just means the terminal. And then from there, we'll actually then log into the dashboard on Google Cloud and show you then App Engine's dashboard and see how the instances come up when, for example, the application is being used, and then for us to be able to see how to diagnose the application, as well as seeing how to set settings for you to scale the application as usage comes in. Okay, so as you can see, the first step there, it says enter the following command to copy the Hello World sample app repository to your Google Cloud instance. So basically on your PC, if you're Windows, you can just say the Windows button with T, and basically that'll open the terminal for you. And then you're going to copy that first instruction, the one that says git clone with the URL attached to it. And basically once you enter that into your terminal, it's then going to start to download the Hello World sample application for you onto your local machine. And that's what we're going to use to then deploy to App Engine. So I'm going to quickly clone the repo on my end. And then once it's done, I'm going to let you guys know, and then we're going to deploy it from there. So I think give me about 1 minute for it to download the repo, and then I'm going to show you how do we deploy the app from there. I see Sabelo says, does it require tokens? No, it doesn't. It does require credits, but if you sign into the Google Cloud Skills Boost, you should be able to get free credits for the lab itself. So you can just use, as you can see on my side, let me show you. I'm not too sure if you can see when my arrow hovers, but basically by the Open Google Cloud console underneath where it says End Lab, you also see the username, and then you see a password, and you see a project ID, right? And that's basically what you then use to log into Skills Boost, or rather to log into your Google Cloud console. And then from there, you're able to see the dashboard for the project. So I'm going to do that on my side. I'm going to now clone the project. And then from there, we're going to essentially go into the repo and then deploy it. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. I just want to see if you guys can possibly see my terminal as well. I might just be swapping in between if possible, just so I can help everyone out. But if it doesn't show my terminal, I'll just continue to explain through the labs. Okay, I hope you can see the terminal on my side. So basically, right now I'm just on the downloads folder on my machine. What I'm going to do is copy and paste the first instruction, which is basically for us to be able to clone the repo locally. So let's allow for that to happen. As you can see, it's starting to download the application. Let's give it about a minute to finish. Okay, awesome. So it basically just downloaded the repo from GitHub. And then now what we're going to do is essentially change directory, which is CD, and then go into the folder that we just downloaded, which is called Python doc sample. So I'm going to now paste the next function which we use, which essentially just says CD, which means change directory. And then we're going into the folder that contains the example project that we just downloaded, right? Very easy. There's no long process there. It's a local function on the machine, so it pretty much just runs automatically. And then now, what are the things we're going to do before we can actually deploy the application, right? Is firstly to update the Python library, right? So remember that once you deploy to App Engine, under the hood, given that we're now using the Python environment, we need to make sure that our Python environment is up to date. So let me firstly put those instructions in to firstly update our Python environment. Okay, so here in the Google Docs, it says sudo apt, right, which is apt. And that's a format that was used to essentially control and update your libraries on your local machine. So on my side, just to give everyone context, I'm just using Fedora as my operating system. I'm not using Windows currently. So on my side, apt is basically a way for you to be able to handle installation of applications, right? But on my side, because I'm using Fedora, I don't use apt, I use DNF, right? Which is basically my package manager. And again, just for um, giving everyone context, DNF, or rather package manager, is basically just a piece of software that allows for you to be able to update, remove, and uninstall software on your own PC, right? So DNF on my side, given that I'm using Fedora, which is a Red Hat based Linux system, is what I use. So on your PC, if you use Ubuntu, you probably stick with apt. And if you use anything else, you just find your own local package manager and then make sure you update your repos, meaning all of your libraries on your computer. And then from there, the next step was to essentially update the Python environment. And once that's updated, we can then now launch an application to GCP, and then we're going to log into the dashboard and then see how it looks. Okay, I see a question from Mateo asking about if there's a text file in the project for the libraries. Yes, there is one. So again, once you download the repository, it's going to come with it. And then essentially that's what's going to allow for you to be able to install all the dependencies required for the project. Okay, cool. So now the next step I did was essentially run the function called Flask app main run. Now, basically what that means is Flask is a web framework that's used in Python for creating web applications. And given this sample that we just downloaded, the Hello World in Python, it's using the Flask framework, right? So when we say Flask app main run, we're basically just running the app on our own local computer. So the reason why we're doing this is just to run the app locally, see that it works. And then once it works, we can make sure then to deploy it to the cloud and then test it once it's on the cloud and access it. Okay, so now the next instruction which I added was gcloud app deploy. And as you can imagine, as it says, is essentially just going to deploy the application to Google Cloud, right? So now what we're doing is we're using the sample app we just downloaded. We're going to launch it onto Google Cloud App Engine using the App Engine service. And then once it's running, we're then going to access it. So for now, as you can see, that gcloud app deploy, it gives us a few pieces of critical information, right? So if you can look there, basically under the function that we used, you're going to see it says services to deploy, right? I think you guys can see my mouse there. It says services to deploy. Underneath that, you get a descriptor. This descriptor, basically, it explains how to scale the service, right? So what tends to happen is, for example, with App Engine, you can say, okay, if maybe 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, however many people you believe on your end in terms of once you've done your web testing, you can say, once it reaches a certain amount of requests, then automatically scale up the service to add more so that you can continue to meet the demand, right? So as I mentioned earlier on, you can imagine if someone is accessing a site like Wikipedia, you could probably take a lot more concurrent, meaning requests happening at the same time, than someone that's running YouTube, because Wikipedia is pretty much just text and pictures, but YouTube is going to be like an application running. There's video content to be downloaded. There's images to be downloaded for the poster of the video. There's comment sections. There's likes and buttons which are reactive. So YouTube is obviously a lot more reactive as a platform. And that's going to mean that when you scale a site like Wikipedia, which is just text-based, you could probably say maybe 10,000 requests concurrently before trying to add new servers or not, versus a site like YouTube, maybe if you get to 1,000, 5,000, you're going to just say add a new server, because the amount of demand from both applications, they vary. So the descriptor, as I mentioned, which is basically a YAML file, if you just looked at the end, it says app.yaml. And YAML file is basically a file that's a descriptor file to describe what should happen on the cloud, right? So as I mentioned, it's going to say, okay, when you reach a certain amount of concurrent requests, then add another server to scale. And you can also start to define the type of server that you want in there as well. So if you wanted to have maybe two CPUs because you're running an application that's maybe CPU intensive, maybe let's say an application that's doing calculations, then you could say that. If you're running an app that's going to be maybe more graphics heavy, then let's say like for example like Canva or maybe even Adobe, then you could say how many GPUs you want before scaling up. So the YAML file will really describe what your application requires and when to scale as well. The next part is the source. This is basically the folder that we're in. It just describes the project that we are launching. And then you get a target version, which basically becomes the time that you launch the application, as well as the URL for the app, right? So in this instance, I'm just going to say yes. I'm going to now deploy the app. And then we're going to log into Google Cloud. I'm going to do that for you guys. And then you'll see how it looks on App Engine once you've deployed an application. So as you can see there, let me scroll up a bit so you can see it says uploading 437 files to Google Cloud, right? So basically what it means is the project that we're in, the Hello World that's in Python, all of the files that are in it to create it, we are going to upload to Google Cloud. And essentially that's going to go into a container, which is what will then run for the app to work so that we can access it over the internet. So it's quickly uploading. And then once it's done, I'm going to firstly load the app for you guys and just show you the Hello World. And then we're going to look at the cloud platform to see how it looks in the dashboard once the app is deployed. Okay, so now I'm going to stop sharing my terminal and then we're going to go onto the Google Cloud platform and take a look at the dashboard for the app, and then we'll access the app as well. Okay, cool. So now that the app has been deployed, we're now on the Google Cloud App Engine dashboard, right? So let me first show you guys. If you look in the top corner, you'll see it says Google Cloud and it says App Engine, right? And then it says versions. So as we discussed earlier on, each time you deploy a new application, you get a new version, right? So we just deployed ours now at, what was it, 1850. So the top one is our latest deployment, basically. And as you can see, I have many other deployments that I've been playing around with. Pretty much what happens is that once you deploy an application, as you can see, you get the version of the application. You then get a status which says whether you've deleted it or if it's being deleted or if it's serving, meaning that it's available to be accessed on the internet. And then traffic allocation, as I mentioned earlier, about having the option to split traffic, where you can allow for people to use a certain version of an app and also have another group use a different version so that you can do product testing, as a lot of big companies tend to do. Then you would use the split traffic option, which is to then serve maybe, let's say, 40% of your users to a certain version and serve another 40% to a different version so that you could just test essentially and see how it works. And then when you go to instances, it then shows that now there's an actual server running to serve the application. And then when you go to runtime, you'll see that it says Python, right? And if you look at all the ones before, it says Node.js, which is my favorite language and engine. And pretty much Python is the language that we used in this Hello World sample app, right? So that's why under runtime, in this instance, it says Python. And then when you get to the rest of it between runtime lifecycle, that just means about general availability, which means it's supported. If it says end of support, that means you might have deployed something a very, very long time ago, as well as when it says deprecated, which means that Google pretty much doesn't support it anymore, and you should pretty much just use a newer version. And then you get what you call a environment. So as you saw earlier on, when we're updating our Python environment, what happens is with App Engine, you then get to decide between having a standard environment, which is where pretty much everything is handled for you. You just state when the application should scale. And then you get also a flexible environment, which is now you have a lot more control in terms of defining how you want the environment to be defined for your service. And then, of course, you get the deployed part, which just shows when the application was deployed and by who as well, right? So now I'm just gonna go to the Hello World app. It's nothing hectic. It's just a text that says Hello World pretty much. But it's just to show you that the application that is being deployed from our local machine can be deployed to App Engine. It can work, we can access it, and we can see all of its diagnostics on the dashboard. So now let me just share the Hello World app so that you can see. So as you can see there, it shows that the Hello World application is running, right? Very, very simple process. We pretty much just downloaded the repo, we CD'd, meaning change directory into the repo, and then we just said gcloud app deploy. And the application was able to deploy to App Engine. We then went to the Google Cloud Platform. We could see the app that's been deployed. We could see if there was an instance. We could see the URL for it, as well as an environment that's being used for it. And now when we access the application, it says hello world, right? So pretty much that was just a very, very short intro to show you how you can use App Engine to deploy web apps and as well as any other microservice. But before I close off on that, I just want to show you guys the repo itself, just so you can understand a bit of how the setup was, because it looks a lot easier. Let me show you that quickly. Okay, I hope my screen is now available there. So basically, I'm just using an editor called Visual Studio Code, VS Code. It's available for free. So the repo that we downloaded, as mentioned, is the Hello World app, right? So what I want to show you guys is the app YAML file and also the gcloud ignore file, right? So let me start with the gcloud ignore file. Very, very simple file as well. So what tends to happen is that typically when you develop an application, you have different files that can essentially configure the app for when it's deployed, right? And now what tends to happen is also there are certain files which you don't want to be deployed when you deploy the application to the cloud, right? One of them being .gitignore. One of the reasons is, of course, you wouldn't like for any of your passwords or anything of that sort to be exposed to the public, right? So a gitignore file typically just allows for you to be able to state the files that you don't want to be made available to the cloud or publicly, essentially, right? So that people can't steal your passwords or anything else of the sort. And then also you get the setup config file, right? And again, this is typically for you to decide on for your local system. So when you run your app locally, you would then use a setup.cfg file. But when you're deploying to the cloud, you don't have to have a setup.cfg file, all right? And then as you can see, the app YAML file, which we spoke about earlier on, which allows for you to define the environment of the app. Here it's very, very simple. We just said Python 312, right? And basically, again, that gives us the environment that we want App Engine to use when deploying the app, right? So Python 3 just means, Python's at version 3 currently, and it's telling App Engine to use Python version 3 when deploying the app, right? And of course, again, you would then have Python 3 installed locally as we did in the first two steps to ensure that it runs locally before then deploying into the app and making sure that it also works on the cloud as well. So pretty much, if I just show you the main file that's used in Python, again, it's very, very basic, just to show you a hello world string. Let me go up a bit. So since you saw earlier on when we said Flask app main run and we were running the application, you can see here in our main Python file, we actually then installed the Flask library. We imported it rather. And basically what that means is we're just telling the Python script to firstly fetch Flask, which is a web framework that is used for developing web applications. And we're then using Flask itself to say if any route is accessed, just return a hello world string, right? And we give it the port as well as where we're hosting it. And this information will also be used again when deploying the app. So now, given that we have firstly shown you how to install the repo, or rather git clone the repo from the example that we had, the App Engine example, we then deployed the app to Google Cloud. We were able to see once the application was deployed, after setting its environment, we could then access the application online directly once it was finished being deployed, which means that essentially you could share the link with anyone else and they could also use the application. And then from there, we're able to see the dashboard for App Engine, which essentially allows for you to see a lot of diagnostics for the app, and also for you to delete instances if you wanted to. If you have any old instances that you had running, you could delete them. If you want to control your traffic for the application, split your traffic, migrate your traffic. Let's say you had an older version of the app and you're now going to a newer version and you want to slowly migrate traffic from your older version to the new version to test it out, see if there's bugs before migrating all of your traffic as well. You could do that as well. So that's mostly the capability that you have in the Google Cloud platform, all right, when it comes to the App Engine dashboard. So today's tutorial and walkthrough of the lab was basically us just firstly defining what is App Engine, defining what serverless functions are, understanding how we can essentially deploy our own app to App Engine, right? And then once it's been deployed, how you can then use the dashboard to either look at diagnostics or again share it with anyone else to also access on their end and use it, right? And that's pretty much how you go from developing an application locally and then sending it all the way to the cloud and having it run and be accessible to the whole world, pretty much. So before I close off, I think I'll just give some time for questions. I see Mupete says, can we get the recording on our emails? We will definitely make that happen. We will share the link once it's up. I see there's another question that says, is it possible to deploy an application that integrates a LLM? If so, what are the best practices for managing sensitive information such as API keys during deployment? It's a very good question. Very, very good question, Savelo. So what I can say is, firstly, in regards to the API keys during deployment, right? That's very, very important. Again, you don't want your sensitive information being exposed, right? And that goes back to what I spoke about earlier in terms of the ignore files. So you get a couple of ignore files, right? You get a git ignore file, and that typically is the file that you define what you want to be ignored when pushing code to a repository, all right? So for a git ignore, you might not cut out your passwords because essentially it's, for the system to run if you have environment variables. But if it's going to be going onto the cloud, you possibly might not want to have it. So you could put the information in a git ignore file. You also have the gcloud ignore file, which again is a specific file that allows for you to define which files should be ignored when deploying to the cloud, right? And also to mention that when it comes to Google Cloud, let me just check the exact name for you. There is a service on Google Cloud called, let me see for you. I just know it's related to Password Manager. Let me check for you. Okay, so it's called Secret Manager. Yeah. So on Google Cloud Platform, if you just search Secret Manager, it's another service that's on Google, which essentially allows for you to define a lot of key value pairs of variables which you want to be secrets, right? And then what you would do on your end is essentially just connect your application to that secret manager, and it will then pull in those different secrets through the application, but obviously in a secure way where it doesn't get shared, right? So that's one of the ways to protect your data. Yeah, I see Sabella says she's happy with that answer. And then in terms of saying that, how would an LLM be tied to App Engine? I think for now, I wouldn't really say you would choose to deploy an LLM onto App Engine. You definitely could, especially when beginning out. But what I can say is that, given LLMs use a huge amount of computation for inference and they have a huge amount of memory demands, you'd probably use a flexible environment to allow for you to be able to change the settings so that you could, as I mentioned earlier, add on a specific amount of memory for that. But I think if you were looking to deploy an LLM, your best option would either be to use Google Kubernetes, right? Or you could use Cloud Run. Again, the only reason for that is because with both of them, you can set directly how much memory you want, as well as even the GPUs that you want. And we all know that GPUs are very important in the process of LLMs. So you could use App Engine if you're deploying just for testing or for a small user group. But once the app is as big as Gemini or any other competitor out there, then Google Kubernetes would probably be your best option. Okay, I see we have another question. It says, does it matter if we use a different framework like Django in terms of logs for the performance? Can we view those? Okay, thank you for the question, Mateo. So, no, you're allowed to use any framework that you want to use for application development. It's completely fine. Pretty much, as long as it runs on your local machine, it could probably run in the cloud, right? So you could definitely use Django if you're more familiar with Django than Flask. That's definitely all right. Again, you would probably use Django's CLI to be able to run the app locally, and if it works, then you would just do another G Cloud app deploy, and it would run on the cloud as well through App Engine. And then in terms of logs for the performance, let me just see if I can share my screen again. But pretty much, you do get a access to those because on the dashboard there's a part that says diagnose, right? And under diagnose there's a logs button, and from there you can pretty much see obviously all the logs from the app itself, but you also then get to see certain metrics like how much memory was used, how much CPU was used, and essentially that'll also guide you in terms of the setup that you want for your application, in terms of scaling and in terms of how much memory and CPU you want available on your server. So yeah, you can access those. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I think thank you for everyone's time today. Very engaging. I think before we close off, I'll just give another minute for any other questions. Okay, I see Isabella says we should share the YouTube link. We'll definitely do that. Let me share the channel link for now in the meantime, and then we'll share the video link once it's up. Okay, so I've just shared the link to the YouTube channel as well. Oh, okay, thank you so much to Zusive for pointing out Sabelo's last question. I didn't see it. I see Sabelo asked, how do you decide the right size, in inverted commas, of a microservice, and when is a service too small or too large? Okay, I think that's a very good question. I think again, it'll probably depend on the overall architecture of a system, right? Um, in this instance, I'll just again make an example, right? So the reason why it's called microservice, again going back to our earlier point, is it's a smaller piece of an overall architecture, right? So the first question is, how are you going to divide your architecture? So in this instance that we made earlier with YouTube, you would have your front end and you would have your back end. You would probably have a notification system running as well for all the notifications to be queued, let's say like a queuing system. And then let's say maybe you also had like one for converting video files from, let's say 1080p to 720p to 480p. This was another service running, right, for transcoding video quality. The point at which a service becomes too large is basically the point at which the service takes on more than a service. That's the reason why it's called a microservice. So once a service is starting to do more than one particular thing in a system, then it depends if either firstly you're doing that out of a choice of design, as we mentioned earlier on. But then if now you're doing it, for example, in this instance, let's say we joined our backend system for serving content to people with our system for transcoding video quality. That's when a service would become too large, right? Because you wouldn't want when people are streaming content on YouTube and changing from 1080p to 720p to have to wait for other people to get their homepage, right? That's when a service becomes too large. But if, for example, now On my end, I'm just going to be controlling the service that does the loading of the homepage and the content. Then that service is not too small because it's serving a particular function. But let's say you then created a service to just serve, let's say, instead of the home page, let's just say typically if you go to YouTube, you'll find that on the left you get a menu, right, where it's like the home page, you get your subscriptions of what you've listened to or watched rather. You also get like the history of what you've watched before. You get like your liked videos. So if you were to deploy a React or Angular app for literally, let's say, each part of the menu of an option, right? Then that's definitely going to be too small. You're not going to want to deploy an application to just load one particular part of an application, right? So that's when it becomes way too small. So it's too big if it's doing more than one particular thing, and especially if one of the services is getting in the way of the other service, that's when it becomes too big. And it's too small if now you're going to be creating too many services to just be doing a simple thing like loading a homepage. Okay, thank you, Zusive. Thank you to you for pointing out that last question. Definitely do like the questions. Completely happy on my side. Thank you so much to everyone for attending. Just give one more minute before we close off. If there's any other questions? Okay, thank you so much for everyone's time. Thank you for attending today's session. We'll be having our next session this Thursday. Once you have your run through of the lab, which I just sent the link of earlier on, you can essentially just do the same G-Cloud app deploy function that we did earlier on. Deploy the app to App Agent, go into your dashboard, access the instance that says hello world, take a screenshot of that, and take a screenshot of your App Engine dashboard, and take a screenshot of the lab being completed. Just those 3 screenshots, and pretty much you'll be done. See, somebody says how to access labs.credits. I don't think you can. I don't think you can. You can probably just send an email to us directly if you have an issue with accessing credits. I'm not too sure if when you log on your side to start a lab, if you don't get free credits, which you should. But at any point, if you have a challenge, you can just let us know. I think for now, I'll hand it over to Chi Chi just to close it off. And from my side, thank you so much to everyone. Okay, I'm sure we may have lost Chi Chi there. That's all right. That's all right. Again, thank you to everyone for attending today's session. If you do have any other questions, please do reach out to us. We'll stay in touch, definitely through email. You can message us on any of our social media platforms. We'll reach out to you there as well. We will have the YouTube video uploaded shortly, and we'll share the link. Once we do, we'll send the email to everyone for that. And thank you so much for attending today's session. Many thanks from my side.